listening to the TCB Radio Network.
Hello, all you Elvis fans. This is Krista Joy, founder of TCBRadioNetwork.com.
And I'm your co-host of TCB Radio Network and Elvis tribute artist, Peter Alden. Welcome to the TCB Radio Network podcast. Get ready for some Elvis content and news you can use, where it's all Elvis, all the time.
Interviews with authors, Elvis fan club presidents, artists, musicians, and of course, close personal friends of Elvis Presley, people who knew him, the man himself.
Thank you for tuning in.
Now sit back, relax, and enjoy.
It's time for the TCB Radio Network podcast.
Tonight we have a very special guest on the line for you. She's a former girlfriend of Elvis, actress, host, stunt woman, model, beauty and healthcare expert, a public speaker. Mindi Miller was a working actress when she met Elvis in early 1975. She was interested in karate and she performed all of her own movie stunts, exploring spirituality and the Bible, and so she and Elvis had a lot in common. She and Elvis bonded over their common interests, and soon after, he asked her to go on tour with him in April 1975. We want to welcome you back to the show. Thank you for being here with us, Mindi Miller.
Thank you so much, Peter and Krista, for inviting me. I love your show, and I just love you guys as people. Yeah, and I just think what you do for Elvis, and you work so hard, and I know how hard Peter works, so I just have to say, you know, it's a joy and it's an honor to know both of you and to be on your shows.
Well, we certainly love having you on, and we've been wanting to have you on since the first time we had you on. So
yeah, thank you. That's really sweet. Thank you for saying that.
I can't believe so much time has gone by already. It's flown.
Yes. We've been friends for over a year now already, so
yeah, I can't believe it.
Time flies when you're having fun.
There you go.
And she hasn't unfriended us yet.
How about that?
Right. What's your name again?
Yeah. Blocked. Anyway.
No.
I love it.
Well, Mindi, you're still doing so much for Elvis. I know you have a fantastic DVD that's out that people can purchase from you, and you're doing lots of wonderful speaking engagements as well. And we'll get to all of that, but we thought for the beginning of the interview, we'd go back a little bit. Can you tell us the first time that you got to go on tour with Elvis was here in our home state of Florida back in 1975. Do you have any memories of him when you first saw him performing on stage? What did you think?
You know, I had seen him before on stage, before I had ever met him when I was younger, when he would come to California. I wasn't able to travel anywhere wherever he was. But when he did come to California and he did come to Anaheim, I saw him. And it was a very different experience, I have to say, because now I had met him, I had known him, I had begun to know him better as a private citizen. That, to me, made all the difference in the world when we were backstage and he was getting ready and getting his clothing on, and, he would, a lot of the time, a lot of people don't realize, but he would pray pretty much before every show, before he went on stage. And he would do it privately, sometimes just in a corner or just walk off to a little space somewhere. And sometimes before he'd go on, he'd be going up the stairs and he'd say a prayer as he was going up the stairs. But he told me that he always prayed for a great show and to not forget words, because he had a propensity sometimes to forget words to certain songs. And he'd be nervous. You would not think that this man would be nervous, but he said, the day I'm not nervous before I go on is the day that my singing career is over. And I said to him, why? Why would you say that? And he said, because it's always new to me, and therefore it should always be new to the audience and to the fans. And, not knowing certain things like this, just going to a performance or just going to a concert, you think, well, okay, they're backstage, they get dressed, they go on. But there were so many other little things that went on before he, came on stage. And so knowing these things and how he thought or what maybe he was going through before he had to go on stage was huge, because sometimes things bothered him in his life, and Sometimes things were brought to him, although the guys knew better not to come to him and say anything that was going to be bothersome to him. They'd say, look, we're not going to tell him this now because he's going on stage and he's got to perform and he's got to have a great show, which completely makes sense. But if something did get to him or something happened, he was, the show must go on, and he was extremely disciplined. So for me, and then, of course, sitting on the side, I never got to sit in the front when I was with him. So I didn't see his shows. I didn't see his concerts like a paying audience member. I sat at the side. I only saw him from the side. So that was very, very different. But I got a whole different bird's eye view. It was amazing from being backstage, getting off the plane, getting out of the car, going into the convention centers, going into the dressing rooms, seeing what he had laid out for him with drinks and soda and water, what he would go through, how he would tease and kid the guys. And, they would make it an atmosphere for him that was going to be fun because they wanted his experience on stage to be fun. They didn't want him to be too nervous. They knew that there's a lot riding on every single show for him. And so the guys always tried to crack jokes and make it funny. And, you can see some of those things in tapes and stuff on YouTube, and you can see it. And he did that almost before every single show. And he always gave him time. He always gave himself time in the dressing room. I never saw him rush from a car to go right on stage. I never saw that. He was always in a dressing room, and he always gave himself time. And then he would have his quiet moments. He'd go off in the corner, have quiet moments, and reflect, and put over in his mind what he wanted to sing and how he wanted to come across. So it was extremely different, very, very different to be on tour with him and watch him, and then what happened before and after, and how they rushed him from the stage. And then he was rushed right to the car. He never went to the dressing room. There was no time, and he couldn't see when he came off stage. He was so blinded by the lights and the flash bulbs and cameras and things. And he had glaucoma as it was. And if you'll notice, most of the time he always wore his glasses, but on stage he never did. So when he would come on stage, he was helped on stage to make sure he didn't miss a step. And when he came off the stage, he was blinded. And he was always led off stage, down the stairs if there were stairs, which there usually were, right into the car, and I would be waiting in the car for him. So I never even got to see the last song or hear the last song. As soon as that last song went on, the guys came and got me and ushered me to the car, and I waited in the car, in the limo, and then we would go either right to the hotel or right to the airplane to go to the next gig or the next city or the next hotel. So it was extremely different, extremely different.
Now, I've always wondered, during the time that you spent with him on the road, did he ever give you any kind of insight into song selection? Obviously, there were certain songs he had to do, but did he ever give you any, like, when he would go through potential songs for that show? Did he ever say, "Ooh, I want to do that one"?
Or did somebody else choose it for him?
No, he always went through the songs by himself. He really did not like other people in charge of his music in any way, shape, or form. His music, the reason he became who he was in so many areas is because he had his own beat. He had his own way of, doing his songs. And there were songs that he really, really loved. He usually, I want to say always, but usually opened up with C.C. Ryder, as we all know. I personally would have liked to have seen him open up with another upbeat song, because the first song coming out was always supposed to be very upbeat, energizing, get the crowd to its feet, get the crowd going. So, ballads or gospel songs would normally be left, to the middle, toward the end. But then he would, he'd have his set, And that set would be out there, and Charlie would know that set. Usually Charlie went over the set with him, but it was Elvis that picked his songs. And normally he is the one that picked the order of the songs. And now I'm not saying he didn't take suggestions, but he wanted to be in charge of his music and what he did first and how he was going to feel. However, once he got on stage, if he was feeling a different vibe from the audience, or he was feeling something different, because, in his own words, the reason he wanted to get back to performing live was because he missed the feedback of the audience. He missed the feedback of the energy that they gave him. So if he was feeling a certain kind of energy from the audience, he would change the songs up. And sometimes he would not tell the band, and he would not tell the backup singers or anybody. He'd say, we're going to do this right now. And, they had to be very, very quick, know his key, and go right into it. And he could be very very fast in his decisions. I mean, he could say, okay, I'm ending this song, and then all of a sudden he'd go, we're not going to do that. We're going to go over here, and you know my key, you know what to do. And, Charlie would hup to it, or Joe Gershio would hup to it, and Ronnie Tutt would get on the drums and start that beat. So he would quite a bit at the time deviate from a particular song and then maybe go right back to the next one. But no, primarily he picked his own songs, and he picked the order they were going to go in.
Okay, so he had his set list, and then the band had another 3 sets ready in case he...
They, once you played with him, once you sang with him and all that, you got used to the fact that he could change it up at any moment and be ready. And, he liked to keep everybody on their toes. He was that kind of a guy. He liked to keep you on your toes. He didn't like people to just be set in their ways in certain things. And he would change it up, and they had to be ready to go. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he'd go over to especially during the Gospels, I remember he'd go over to J.D. Sumner, and he'd say, okay, you're going to do this whole song. And J.D. would just, have to go right into it. He'd give him a big smile, I remember, because a lot of the time I was on that side of the stage where the suites were, and the guys were, and I'd watch their faces, and Elvis would kind of go over, and, the audience couldn't really see it, but I could see it because I was right there. And I remember a couple of times J.D. would just look at him like, hey, man, really? Like, really, you're going to do this to me now? and Elvis would give him a big smile back, and they loved each other so much. And J.D.'d go into it, or Elvis was supposed to sing a certain part, and he'd go to J.D. and put the mic in front of him and go, it's all you. It's all you, buddy. It's all you, son. and he would do that, And then, sometimes he'd spring a song on that he wasn't going to do, where Kathy Westmoreland had the high part, and then, of course, he'd go over, he usually lifted up her right hand or her right arm, and lifted her arm up and said, I want to introduce you to Kathy, the sweet little girl with the high voice. And he would sometimes spring songs on her where, she wasn't ready to go into it, and she did. She had to.
Well, let's go back. We had you on the show before, but I wanted you to retell in case anybody missed it, because we've sort of jumped ahead to the glamorous years, that time that you spent with Elvis. But your meeting him for the first time was actually a really cool story, and probably not what people would expect.
Well, let me ask you, do you want me to start with the premonition I had, or when I was in the private club and some people came up to me, or when I actually went to his house? Because it could tend to be a little bit long, and I'm fine with the time, but you tell me where you want me to start. Do you want me to start at the premonition?
Yeah, let's do the whole kit and caboodle.
The whole thing. Okay. So my girlfriend and I are driving. We are headed north, going up Laurel Canyon, which is a cross street there. It cross streets a lot of other streets, Santa Monica, Melrose, Beverly, all that. But we were headed up, going into the San Fernando Valley. And we were I think I was in my Jeep. I had a Jeep at the time. I was in my Jeep. And we were stopped at a red light, and we were headed north, and this beautiful black Stutz bear cat or bear hawk was sitting there, in front of us coming in my direction. So, usually you look at the cars across the intersection, and I looked at that car and I turned to my girlfriend. Her name is Carol, and I said, Carol, that is the most beautiful car I'd ever seen. Now, it's not a big deal to see cars in LA. I mean, the best of the best are here. You have every Rolls Royce, every Tesla, every Bentley, every kind of car you can imagine, but nobody at that time had that car. And my understanding is he had 4 different Bearcats, or I want to say Bearcats, Bearstuts, Bearhawks, and then he had a white one. But in this one, he had one that he primarily kept in California. He had another one he primarily kept in Memphis. And I remember as the light changed, I couldn't see who was driving it, but as the light changed, he crossed over the intersection, and I crossed over the intersection, and I looked over to see who was driving because of the car, and I thought, well, it's got to be some star or somebody. And I looked over to my left, and I went, oh, my God, and I turned to Carol, and I said, Carol, that's Elvis Presley. And she said, oh. And he didn't look at me, obviously. He's looking straight ahead. I remember he had glasses on. He didn't have a hat on. He had a nice shirt on. I do remember that. No hat. He had his glasses on. And I don't know who else he had in the car. I couldn't tell. But he crossed over, and I literally had to pull the car over. And Carol goes, what's the matter? What are you doing? And I almost hit another car because we were in the left lane and there was a right lane. And I almost hit another car, and I pulled over. I mean, I screeched over. And she said, what's the matter? And I said, I just felt like I just got hit in the head. And she goes, what's the matter? Like, do you have a headache or something? I said, no. I said, but the weirdest thing just came over me. I said, it was like I've just been hit. And I said, I got the weirdest feeling. I said, not only am I going to meet this man someday, I'm going to know him. And I said, I don't know how, and I don't know where. And again, I wasn't somebody that ever thought of meeting Elvis Presley. I mean, I thought of meeting Troy Donahue. I thought of meeting, everybody doing the surfing movies, and because it was a time of surfing and the valley and the beaches. And so as much as I liked Elvis Presley, I wasn't this huge fan. So it never entered my mind. So, I thought, wow. And then I got myself contained. We kept driving. Then I moved to Europe. I was modeling and acting in Rome, and I was living with my boyfriend there at the time. And we were there for, I'd say, about a year and a half. And he and I split up, and I stayed in Europe, and he came back to America. He was also an actor. And I came back to close at my apartment, and I was only here for about a week, and I was going to take the rest of my clothes and take them back to Rome, Italy, and close up the apartment and sell my car. I had a 67 GT Ford convertible Mustang at the time that I had batched in the back. I'd backed into a pole, and I hadn't gotten it fixed yet. And I went out to a private club because I love to go dancing. And it was a private club called the Candy Store. It was on Rodeo, and it was very, very famous. A guy named Johnny Von Neumann owned it, and he was the one that started VW. And we had a very famous hairdresser named Jean Chakov at the time, and these two guys owned it. And everybody went in there, from Jacqueline Bisset to all the athletes, all the major actors. So the average guy couldn't get in. But I was young, and I guess they found me quasi-semi-attractive, and they thought, well, she'd be good for the club. Let her in. So I used to go in, and, it was a typical thing, the older guys, the younger girls, and the stars and celebrities. So I went in one night by myself, and I was just going to go dancing, and I knew some other young people that were in there that I could go dance with. And I was in the club, and a guy came up to me that I knew that ended up knowing the guys in Elvis's group. And he came up to me, and he said, listen, I haven't seen you for a while. Where you been? I told him I'd been in Europe. And he said, well, I'd like to invite you to a party that's going to be this coming weekend. And I said, Ron, very honestly, I don't have time. I don't have the inclination. I'm packing up. I'm ready. I'm getting ready to move to Europe permanently. And he said, oh my gosh. He says, take my number. He said, give me your number. You might change your mind during the week. And I said, okay. I probably won't, but whatever. And he called me every single night. And every night he called, he says, so have you thought about the party? And I said, no, I haven't, Ron. It's just a party, and I'm busy packing. I'm trying to sell my car. I have a lot to do. I have a plane on a definite date and time, to take me back to Europe. So I would say about 3 or 4 days before I was supposed to leave for Europe, he calls me and he said, look, he says, you really need to go to this party. And I said, what is so special about this? And I was really getting angry. And he said, well, he said, I'll tell you something. He said, it's going to be a very special party, and it's going to be at Elvis Presley's house. And it still didn't hit me that I had this premonition, like 2.5 years prior to that. Didn't hit me. And I said, who else is going to be there? He said, I'm not sure. He said, but it's going to be a very upscale, very classy party, and you should really go. And I thought about it, and then all of a sudden it hit me, like the light bulb went on over my head. And I went, oh my God, that's right, I had the premonition. But they never said Elvis was going to be there. They never said that I was to be his date. They never said there wasn't a party. It was all a ruse to get me there, to meet him. And I never knew it. So I got dressed, I went up to the house. I was an hour late, and I got up to the house on Monteville. And I drove up, and this big, huge, long, gorgeous driveway, and I announced myself at the street, and there were no cars in the driveway at all. And I thought, well, this is really weird. I hope I have the right address. But I was 24 at the time. It was March 12th or 13th. He had just finished that day recording Trouble. I knocked on the door, and I forget who answered, but they said, hi, you must be Mindi. And that's when I said, how would they know who I am if it's a big party, So I said, yes, I am. And they said, oh, okay, great, come on in. I went in. The house was completely empty. There was furniture, but there were no people. So I didn't say anything, and I thought, okay, it must be in the back or another room or outside or something. So then he led me into the den, which was a huge room. They had the TV going on, and there was no party. There were all these guys, just guys, sitting around on each side of the room, and then toward the back, and they had the TV on, and Farrah Fawcett was on doing a Wella Balsam commercial. And they sat me down on the couch, and it was a long couch with a long coffee table in front of it. And they said, hi, and you're Mindy Miller, nice to meet you, and how old are you? And that's when they started asking me all the questions, do you have brothers and sisters? Have you ever been married? Do you have kids? Are you religious? Are you a spiritual person? What do you do? We understand you're living in Europe. What did you come back for? I mean, where did you go to school? I mean, everything you could imagine. It was an interview. It was an inquisition. And I thought, it's really weird. And that was about an hour. And then a couple of the guys walked out. And I found out later they went out to tell Elvis she's okay. And he had been upstairs all this time waiting for me. So me being an hour late, he was not happy about that, which I didn't know at the time. I found that out later. And he had seen me pull up in my car, which was bashed in, and he had seen me get out of the car. So he had been watching upstairs through the windows, which of course I didn't know, which of course I found out later. They left, and then nobody talked, and then all of a sudden I was sitting there, and I'm watching the TV, and I felt this, like somebody just knocked me over. I mean, it was like this hit in the head again. And I thought, my God, am I getting a headache? What's happening? And I felt this presence just permeate the entire room. And I didn't know where it was coming from. And all of a sudden, I just looked to my right. Nobody was announced. Nobody said anything. And there he was. He was just standing in the doorway. And he had on his, I think, I'm trying to remember clearly. I think he had his little white tennis hat on. And he had on his sweats. I think they were the ones that were blue and white, and the white stripe down the arms. And he walked in, he kind of sauntered in, he looked at me, he didn't say a word. Well, he did say a word, I'm sorry. He walked over, and before he walked over to me, he looked at me and he said, hi, honey, sorry I'm late, but so were you. And I looked over and I burst into laughter. He started laughing, all the guys started laughing, which broke the ice. And then he sauntered over to the table and came around to my left side, put out his right hand, bent over to shake my hand, and he said, hi, I'm Elvis. And I looked up at him, and I put my right hand out, and I said, hi, I'm Mindy. It's so nice to meet you. And he sat down, and that was the beginning. We never stopped talking. And then after that, he offered me a car. Within the first hour, he got out the jewelry box, wanted me to take jewelry, wanted to buy me a car. And I said, no. Nope, not going to happen.
Now, did you ever get a chance to tell him about this premonition that you had the 2 years before?
I never told him, and I thought about it. But, I never told him because I didn't want him to think that I had been looking for a way to meet him, or that I had been scheming to meet him. Because a lot of fans and a lot of people did. They thought, oh, he's going to be, here, he's going to be there. Let's stand outside and find him and get an autograph and this and that. But I wasn't that kind of a fan. I only had, I think, 2 records by him. One was Wise Men Say, Only Fools Rush In, and then the Hawaiian Wedding Song. Those were the 2. My mom bought me the 45s. That was it. I didn't have an album. I didn't have pictures of him. I didn't dream about him. I didn't think about him. And, I saw him on the Ed Sullivan Show when I was 5 years old. My mom and I were sitting in the den, and Ed Sullivan was huge at the time. And he had his show on every Sunday at 8 o'clock, his variety show. And we could always count on Ed Sullivan to bring us all the new hot talent. So he brought us the Beatles, and he brought us, he had been promoting Elvis for a long time, that he was going to have him on the show. And so, we were glued to the set. My mom was glued, I was glued, but I was barely 5. And there he was, and he was doing, shake, rattle, and rolling and doing all his stuff. And I remember looking at him, but being 5 years old, I didn't have this kind of high school crush or, teen crush on him. I wasn't, the hormones were not in effect at that point. So
Right.
being 5 years old, I was just, he's really fun, Mom. He's really good, I didn't think any more about it. But then as I got older, I think I was about 12 or 13, and he did, the Hawaiian Wedding Song. And because I had grown up in Hawaii the first 4.5 years of my life, and I loved Hawaii, I wanted to have that song. And of course, later I found out that he loved Hawaii too. So again, I didn't want to tell him about the premonition because I thought that maybe he would think that I had been looking for a way to meet him or something. And he did not date fans. If he had fans and he felt you were a really good fan and honorable to him and respectful of him, he would invite you into the house or any one of the houses. A lot of people that we know, became friendly with him. Sandy K. Stevens, Sandy Miller. A lot of people became friendly with him and some of the entourage. But, by the time I met him, I'd been in show business a long time. I started when I was like 12 years old doing children's theater. So I knew that you didn't say certain things to actors and singers and people in the entertainment industry. You didn't want to get their heads thinking. They don't want to think that you are following them, or that you are what's the word I'm looking for when
stalking.
You're scoping them out. You know what I mean? Or you're trying to place yourself in a place where somebody would introduce you. It was never like that, not at all. So this just, this was all very innocent. It was all quite a shock to me. But again, I was much older for my age, so. I never told him. I never did. Never said a word.
So this was his house out in California?
Yeah, I want to say 144 Montevale. And at the time, my apartment was only 15 minutes away.
Wow.
I literally stayed there all night. He put on a karate exhibition with the guys. He changed into his gi. He ordered all the spiritual books. I mean, not even all of them. And he gave me a ton of them that night, and then more and more and more. And I think what he realized also is that I was not into the material things like that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love nice things. It's nice to have a nice car, a nice purse, and good, nice clothes. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate all that. But I've never been, at my core, a materialistic person. And I think that he got that when I said no thank you to the car and the jewelry and all that. And when he said to the guys, I want you to get this, this, and this. I didn't know that they were for me. I thought he was just expecting spiritual books. So my eyes didn't really light up or anything. And he didn't say they were going to be for me. And then when Al opened the door and brought in these books, that's when Elvis did it like a presentation. And he said, honey, he said, you won't take the jewelry, you won't take the car. He goes, what will you take? And I didn't say anything. He said, he says, I hope you'll take these. He said, I think you're a very spiritual young lady. He said, I can see you're already on the path. And he said, if you will allow me, we will study together. And he said, we're all teachers. And he said, and we're all students. And he said, you can be my teacher and I'll be your teacher and we'll be each other's students. He said, you have a great insight for someone so young. And when I left that night, I remember Dave Stanley coming downstairs saying, Elvis really, really likes you and he wants to see you tomorrow night. And one of the things he said to me that I'll never forget, he said, he loves the fact that you are so spiritual. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I've been like this my whole life. He said, yeah, but he says, you don't know Elvis. He says, but you have to understand, he said, that's his biggest thing. And he said, not a lot of people connect with him on that level. He said, so that's a big deal for him. And I remember David telling me that. I'll never, ever forget it. It stuck in my mind. And I realize now, after all these years and after having spent time with him, got to know him, that was who he was. Essentially, that's who he was. And that was his id. That was the essence of who Elvis Presley was. And to me, really shows me so much about him is his insight into people. He could read people so well and very, very quickly. And he could tell that, those things didn't matter to me. And it's like I've said to people, I've sold the car. I don't have the dress I wore to his funeral. I wish I did, or the shoes. I should have kept them, but I didn't. Because I don't think in those terms. I never thought about, selling the dress or selling the shoes or saying I wore this to Elvis Presley's, funeral. I never have thought that way. Yeah. It doesn't enter my mind. I believe truly that he picked up on that and said, she'll like the books. And the books are everything to me. They are not out of my sight. And when I take them on tour, they don't leave my purse. They don't leave my lap. I don't even leave them in the hotel room. If I go out to dinner with an event and the people are taking me out for the events, they're with me. I don't trust it. It's not because I can't get those books again. Some of them are out of print, and you cannot get them. But the fact that he gave them to me, and the way he presented them to me, and the fact that he wanted me to have them to study with him and underlined in them. And, that to me is much bigger than getting a TCB or a TLC or a car or the jewelry or any of it, because that's him. That's the id of who he is, You're
listening to the TCB Radio Network podcast, where we're celebrating the life and memory of Elvis Presley.
Hello, friends. This is Elvis Presley. I am Marion Cox, the official sex symbol on TCB Radio Network.
This is Mindy Miller.
This is Ray Walker from the Jordanaires.
This is Elvis's Speedway co-star, Victoria Paige Myrie. This is Cynthia Pepper from Kissing Cousins.
This is Zoe Botto, author of Elvis Style, from Zoot Suits to Jumpsuits.
This is Don Wilson. And if you're looking for Elvis, you're in the right place, TCB Radio Network.
Where it's all about Elvis.
Everything is about Elvis. It is all about Elvis.
All Elvis, all the time.
If you want to listen to something really stylish, listen to tcbradionetwork.com.
You can't do any better than that, so stay with us.
People who know Elvis know about TCB Radio Network, where it's all Elvis, all the time.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, sir.
Hi everybody, I'm Krista Joy, and I want to let you know that tonight's show is co-hosted and sponsored by PeterAldenEntertainment.com and PeterAldenLive.com. Peter Alden is a classically trained vocalist with a voice like velvet who performs everything from country to pop while specializing in the golden era of rock and roll. Based in Orlando, Florida, but able to travel all over the world, he can come to you. Please support TCB Radio Network by hiring Peter Alden for musical entertainment or to MC at your next event. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Peter Alden Fans. Yeah, definitely such a spiritual side to him, and I know that that's something that he and Larry Geller discussed a lot as well. The spiritual side. You're the only person other than Larry Geller that discussed all these things with him so in depth. Now, I know you know Larry Geller, correct?
I do, and I adore Larry. I love Larry.
Yeah,
Thank God for Larry, because that was Elvis's salvation during times in his life where he really needed someone to talk to, because he wasn't always here in LA, and he couldn't always go to the Mahatma Mother, which he would go to, and he would go to her alone. He would get on his motorcycle or drive and go see her. One of the last times, just several months ago, when I went to the Shrine Center, where he got a lot of his books, where I now get a lot of my books, and he prayed and he studied. He would go to the Mahatma Mother, and he would go to her house, and they would pray together, and she would teach him, and that was extremely privy only to him. And then he would share that with me, and I'm thinking, how many people got to share that with him?
Yeah.
I know Larry did, and Larry may have gone with him, but not a lot of other people got to share that side of him that deeply. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, sadly, I don't think there were a lot of people that were interested in that side, and which is very sad. And I think so when somebody finally was, he grasped onto them.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. He did. And he got flack for it. He got flack for it from the ex-wife. He got flack for it from the colonel, from some of the guys in the group. I think that a lot of them, and I'm not putting any of them down, but they may have had a different belief system, you know? Mm-hmm. Maybe they had a religious belief that did not allow them to go in more of an esoteric direction. Mm-hmm. And Elvis was a dreamer. He dreamt as a little boy. When you see his costumes on stage, so much of that was not only from Liberace, but was from the fact that, you know, he used to, I forget the character's name, but in the comic book, he had a character that he really loved, and he had a cape.
Yeah, it was Captain Marvel Jr.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to say the Marvel comic books, but I wasn't sure if it was Captain Marvel. But a lot of what he designed in his life came from his childhood, and he took that with him in his stage presence. He took that with him in his costumes. He took that with him in the way that he dressed. He was living his dream. That was his dream, and he wanted to live it. And he was always a very curious young man, and even as a boy, he told me, and he would always read. He was reading voraciously. There was never a time I would come into the room or anywhere where he wasn't reading. I mean, if he'd go to his bathroom, it wouldn't be just to take a shower. He'd go take a shower, and he'd be in there for an hour and a half reading. I mean, the man loved to read. And sometimes, even though he would, you know, we would be alone in the bedroom, especially at Graceland, he still needed his own time, and he knew it. And he'd say, you know, I'll be out in a little while. And I'd say, don't worry, you take your time, you do what you need to do. But I knew he was reading in there. He was very concerned about having his own solitude. He knew that every living person needed that, because he would say, you know, you don't hear God speak to you unless you're quiet.
Wow.
And you know, we meditated a lot. He loved to meditate, sit cross-legged. We'd meditate in the hotel rooms. We'd meditate on his big bed in Graceland, and it was freezing in his bedroom. His bedroom was so cold. And so I'd wear like double pajamas and a robe. He'd say, like, honey, don't you think you have too many clothes on? I say, but it's freezing in here, you know. But anyway, you know, so he'd be sitting there in his pajamas, cross-legged, and I'd be with the pajamas and the robe and the socks and the slippers, and we'd be cross-legged meditating and praying, and Christ light, Christ love, you know, and he really needed that to himself. He needed that, and there was really nobody else. And once Larry Geller kind of left the scene for a while, he was searching. He was searching for it, and he always believed in esoteric psychologies. he was the most fascinating man in that respect. And that's the part of him that I like to share, because it's like I've said to people, there are books upon books. You can find out what day he wore what jumpsuit. Mm-hmm. It's no big deal. But that is not, in essence, who he was. And I say to people, what is it that you love about Elvis? And some people will say, well, I love his music. I love the way he dressed. I love this and that. And then other people will say that he was so generous, that he loved his mother, and that he was spiritual. And they'll say that, but they won't know how he believed or what he wanted his audiences or his fan base to know. And that's what makes me sad, and those are the things that have not really been shared during his legacy, and that's what saddens me. And I would like to impart on his fans, because they're not my fans, they're his fans. I would like to be able to impart some of who he was that I'm able to share, of the things that he would approve of, to his fans, because that's what he wanted them to know. And rest my mother's soul, I have no reason to lie about that. He told me many times that these are the things he wanted his fans to know about him, and he had no way of sharing it with them on a global stage, mm-hmm. because he was up there singing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So he can't administer to every single person how he feels and what he wants them to know, which is why I now do my daily devotions from one of the books he loved. And this was actually one of the Mahatma's books, and this is one of the books I'm looking for. It's here at the Self-Realization Fellowship Center from the Paramahasa Yogananda, and it's been put into Spiritual Diary that gives you daily devotions. So I do the daily devotions from Jesus Always, and also from the Spiritual Diary from the Yogandananda, and these are what Elvis believed, and he would get up every morning and read all these things, and read before he'd go on stage, pray before he went on stage. This is the essence of this man, and it's not been shared, except for Larry.
And now you.
Yeah.
Now you.
I'm doing my best. I'm not invited to everything, and that's okay. But what I am invited to, there seems to be a lot more. The event planners are telling me that they are getting more interested in this, and that the fans that buy their tickets in their cities and states and countries are getting more into it. They want to know more who the man is. Yeah. That you can only know so much about a jumpsuit. Right. Bill Ballou made them, and he had them in this color and that color, and they had a slant to the cuff and a slant to the cuff of the pant and to the wrist, and there's only so much you can. And then what?
Well, then you become a tribute artist and sing the wrong song in the wrong suit, and you'll hear about it then, let me tell you.
Well, see, and I never even got to do that because I didn't know what an ETA was before 3 years ago.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, in fact, so am I correct? I'm thinking that, so you were at Graceland when the funeral happened, and then the next time you were there was not until, 2017?
Last year.
Yes, so you went back for the 40th.
I could not bring myself to go back, Krista. I could not bring myself to go back there.
Yeah, I can understand why. But tell everybody what it was like. Now, did you get to go in the house when you were there in 2017?
Yeah, what? Okay, in 2017. I thought you were asking about the funeral. Yes, I was invited by Andrew Hearn of Essential Elvis in England, and he is the first person that ever he kind of outed me, let's say. And I'm forever grateful to he and Jessica Wettesinger, who she and I have become very good friends since then. And Andrew invited me over to England, and I went. And it was my first ever live interview. It was my first ever interview. I had given 2 small interviews years and years ago, which actually both ended up being in England. And I had told my publicity agent at the time I was doing a TV series called Switch with Robert Wagner and Eddie Albert when Natalie Wood was still alive. And I said to him, he said, well, we need to promote you and the series and this and that. And he said, what have you got to promote? And I told him, and he said, oh, Elvis. He goes, nobody's bigger than Elvis. We got to promote that. And I said, oh, no, we're not. And he looked at me like I was crazy. Now, this is a man I'm paying $3,000 a month to promote me. And he's asking me what I have to promote with. So, clearly it's a lot easier doing social media now. You don't have to pay these people an arm and a leg. But I said, no, that's not going to happen. And he said, why? I said, because it's not permissible. That's not what Elvis would want. He said, well, you've got to be kidding. He said, you're not dating him anymore. I said, that doesn't matter. This was in 1977, before he had passed away. I said, no, I won't do it. I said, I will not do it. And he said, well, what about if you do a small interview here and there and it'll be in England? And, I didn't know his fan base was huge in England. I had no idea. I guess they came out in England, but it was of little interest, I think, at that time. So then, of course, I never said anything for 40 long years. And so this was the first time I went to England. And Andrew was very kind, and they had a very nice turnout, and people came. And it was the first time they'd ever heard about me. It was the first time they'd ever heard my stories or my time with him. And I wanted to impart on them what Elvis had told me that he wanted his fans to know. And I told them that. And that was the whole spiritual side of it. And Andrew said, we just want to hear some great stories. And I said, well, I don't talk about anything else. And I talk about nothing that Elvis, I know, would not want spoken about. His private life or how he led it or what he did or things that may have happened. That will never come out of my mouth. And it never has. Now, that's not to say privately I don't discuss with my closest friends certain things, but those things would never be made public, and I would never write about them. And I honor that to this day. There are things in your personal life, in all of our personal lives, that are private, that are nobody else's business.
Absolutely.
And even though they may have come out through other people, you won't hear it from my mouth.
So now we cut you off. So let's go back then. You did say that you did go in to Graceland during the funeral, or did they keep everybody outside?
Yes, I was called, and I was told what happened. Of course, I was devastated, yet not devastated, if you can understand it. I knew that he was not well. I could tell that he wasn't well, but I didn't really expect that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, he was too young.
Yeah, he was young.
Yeah.
But like you said, he was going through some issues, and so people weren't. I think they were surprised, but not surprised.
Well, here's the thing: he was so strong, and during any illnesses he had, he always bounced back. He was so strong, and mentally, he was extremely strong. Physically, he was strong. Internally, we all have, whether it's a bad heart or maybe born with a bad kidney, or internally is different. But he had a very strong core. His physical entity was very strong. His mental capacity was extremely strong.
Yes, photographic memory and all that.
So, we always thought that he would bounce back. He definitely needed a rest. He definitely needed to take time off. We all wish he could have and would have, but he chose not to at that time, and that was his decision. But I started packing in a hurry. I didn't even know what to take. I was panicking. And I packed a black dress, which, looking back now, it should have been white, because he loved white, which was his favorite color besides blue. He wore a lot of royal blues and baby blues. He wasn't that fond of red. He only had a couple of jumpsuits and things that were, but if you look at most of his jumpsuits, I literally just got a whole bunch of new pictures of him, and almost every single jumpsuit was a different white jumpsuit, done differently, in his different designs and patterns and things. But I just threw things in. I didn't even have time to think. And I should have worn white. And, of course, as it was, all the 17 cars, limos were white.
They were all white.
Everything was white, yeah. And I should have worn white. I'm very sorry I didn't. But I panicked. I wasn't thinking. I thought, oh, my God, I just got to get there. So, I got to the airport. And prior to getting on the plane, I was told I needed to take a taxi, and they'd pay for the taxi and all that. And I said, okay. And I was supposed to go on the Lisa Marie plane, but then Linda and I were not allowed on the plane. His ex-wife decided that only a few people were allowed to go. So I felt that it was a waste of the plane, really, because it cost so much to fly that thing. And, you know, the gas and the pilot and everybody has to be paid. And it's a waste of space, really. And I didn't think that that was the time to be particular. It's a time that we're all honoring this man that we all loved, that we all shared time with, some more than others, which didn't matter. But I was, you know, I threw it out. I threw it out, and I just went, oh well. I didn't get angry. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. I just needed to get there. So we were told. Joe Esposito called me, and he said, "Listen," he said, "just we've made arrangements with American Airlines. You are going to go on American Airlines, and they're bumping people off the plane for Elvis's people to get to Graceland." So I got to Graceland, and one of the guys picked me up at the airport, took me not even directly to the hotel, took me straight to Graceland, and it was a shock. It was an absolute shock. The streets were just lined and lined and lined, and helicopters were overhead, and police, and any kind of enforcement, any kind of law enforcement you can think of was there. And by the time I got there, it was night. It was nighttime. And it's about a 4-hour flight to Memphis and Nashville, the same. I want to say it was about 1:30 here. 1 or 1:30 here. It was about 3 or 3:30 in Memphis, because it's 3 hours later when I heard about it. And I went straight into the house, and we had to pass. I don't even remember who was at the gates, who opened the gates for us, but we went up to the gate, and there were cars there, and there was no media allowed in the house, thank God. It was one of the few times that media was not allowed. Although later we found out that Maria Shriver was in there, and everybody thought that she came to pay respects, and we were all shocked to find out that she was media. And they would not have liked that. So they thought she was paying respects as the president's daughter, and she came in, and that wasn't the way it was. So, I went into the house, and when I got to the house, I just fell apart. I'd been trying to keep it together, but I just fell apart, and the first person I looked for was Joe, and I fell into Joe's arms, and we both started sobbing. I looked for Vernon, and Vernon was in the back room, and Joe said, "It's not a good time." I said, "Okay," and then I went to go see Grandma Dodger and Delton. Joe said, "It's not a good time." So he said, you'll have your moments, but there's going to be a time for all of this in the next, couple, 2-3 days. So I went and said hi to other people and hugged them, and people were crying and people were talking, and it was just a whole evening of disbelief. And I don't think that he was laying in state at that point. I believe they brought him back the next morning. I don't remember. I don't remember if I saw him that night or not. I may have. I'm trying, but I would need to go into the books and see what time they picked him up from the hospital, or where they prepared his body and brought him back. I would need to look that up, because I want to say that I went in to the music room, which is where he was laying in state, and saw him. But I don't remember if it was that night or the next morning. But I went back many, many times to see him during the course of the days and the course of staying there throughout the day and the evening, to say final goodbyes and things. Nobody's really talked a lot about that, but that's okay. But, so many years later, you think back on these things, and that's why it was very tough for me to go back into that house, because it's not like I was there. I mean, I was there during happy times, and I was there for the funeral. And not many of the girlfriends were there for the funeral. I mean, I was there. Linda was there. Sheila did not go. Barbara Lee did not go. I'm trying to think who else was there. Ann Marker was there. But it was really, when you stop and consider all the people that he knew, there were quite a few people that really were not invited. A lot of people went to the public funeral, and pretty much I think anybody could go, as long as there was room outside, because there were chairs outside during the service at Forest Hills. But you had to really be invited to come into the house, and stay there. So this is why I didn't go back for all those years. I couldn't bear it because my last memories of that house was him, was the funeral. Mm-hmm. It's not like I went there on a happy occasion and didn't see him for a while and didn't go back. Right. Do you know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
This was a whole other scenario of walking into that house, remembering. So it was very difficult for me to go last year, and I was really numb. I thought I would burst into tears. I really thought I would lose it. But I was so numb that I couldn't even cry. I was just numb when I walked into the house. And, there were tourists there and all that, so I kind of really had to keep my cool. And they took pictures outside the house for Andrew's book and things like that, and all over the estate, and, in the back by the pasture with the horses and things. But I had not seen his resting place, because when I left him was at Forest Hills. Yeah. And then 2 months later, they moved him to his meditation garden, which, as we all know now, was built after the self-realization shrine that he loved so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that you're right, that was pretty quickly, because I know that they were afraid that someone was going to, I guess there was a plot to steal his body, so... Yeah, there was. So that's when his daddy said, let's bring him home. And they had to get clearance and all that. So I had seen none of this. So you have to remember, I went 40 years. I mean, I didn't put a picture up of him. I couldn't bear it. It was hard enough for me. I had to literally come back and go right back to work because the producers of Switch let me off for 1 week. And I said, I need to leave. And they said, why? Are you quitting the show? You have a contract? I said, no. I said, someone I'm dating. And even then I wouldn't tell them. I said, someone I've been dating has passed. And they said, oh my God, we're so sorry. And I said, yeah. And they said, where, how long, is it a day? Is it local? And I said, no. They said, well, where is it? I said, it's in Tennessee. And they said, oh my God. They said, well, Elvis Presley just passed away. I said, I know. And then I had to tell him, because I said, look, I need a week. Yeah. I need a week. I'll be there 3 or 4 days, and then I got to come home. I said, I need some time. They said, well, we'll give you as long as we can, but you need to get back to work. And I remember going back on the set, and RJ coming up to me, and he said, we're so sorry, we had no idea. Nobody knew you were dating him. I said, no, I never talked about it. I never promoted it. And he said, well, Natalie used to date him. I said, yeah, I know. So he didn't go? Because I knew he knew Elvis, but so he didn't go?
No, he did not go. He was not invited.
Oh, okay.
You had to be invited.
Okay.
It wasn't like anybody could just go. And we were doing the show at the time. See, he couldn't leave the show. He and Charlie Callis, Sharon Gless, and who's the other guy I love?
Eddie
the other
Albert.
actor.
Eddie Albert.
Eddie Albert, thank you. I was almost going to say Ed Asner, Eddie Albert. They couldn't leave. They were the principals of the show.
Right.
So I had to get right back to work. I had no time to mourn. And so I kept my mouth shut for 40 years. Never said a word, didn't hardly even listen to the man's music. I could not do it. I just couldn't do it. I could not do it. And so all these years, I didn't know what was going on. I mean, this was like somebody took me and put me in a jail cell, and I heard no news. I very rarely heard anything that went on. I didn't listen to it. Now, I was still friends with Joe Esposito, and I still spent a lot of time at his place because he lived 1 mile from me. But, other than him, I didn't talk about it with anybody. But he needed to talk. I needed to talk. But you're in the same circle. You can talk. Mm-hmm. I can't just go out and talk to my girlfriends or talk to somebody in the general public about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, like I said, I kept myself out of it for all these years. I didn't know what was going on at Graceland. I didn't know. I really didn't even want to know. I was so despondent for so long. And then, of course, somebody else put me on Facebook, and then it all happened. So it's all still been very new to me, and I've learned a lot in 3 years.
Yeah.
It's actually 3 years this month that I first came out on Facebook.
Wow.
That's amazing. Thanks for listening to part 1 of this interview. Tune in this Wednesday for the exciting conclusion. Don't forget to subscribe to TCB Radio Network on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. By subscribing, you'll get a notification as soon as our latest episode drops. While you're at it, please rate us with a 5-star review. This will help other Elvis fans find our show. Also, this just in, you can now subscribe to our podcast episodes on YouTube. We also have a YouTube channel that includes archived episodes of our Facebook Live broadcasts and more. You can find links to this and so much more at tcbradionetwork.com.
We'd also like to thank Lee Douglas of Old Time Rock and Roll, always found at www.oldtimernr.com, for converting our show to iTunes. We appreciate you, Lee. Be sure to check out Lee's fantastic site and listen to his weekly shows, all oldies music with no commercials. TCB Radio Network is strictly a fan publication, not affiliated in any way with Elvis Presley Enterprises or any of its affiliates or subsidiaries. Please visit us online at tcbradionetwork.com. All trademarks, product names, company names, and logos mentioned are the properties of their respective owners. All opinions stated within do not necessarily reflect the opinions of anyone else, and certainly not Elvis Presley Enterprises.
Still the King, our theme song for TCB Radio Network podcast, was written by Shane Douglas, produced by Terry Fullwider at Blue Spot Studios, and performed by Peter Alden and his band Crown Electric Company, featuring David Fontana, son of Elvis Presley's original drummer DJ Fontana, on drums.
Elvis Presley is still the king. Well, he's still the king. That's all right. Man, he sure could sing. That's all right. Still the king.